Last January, I was standing in the back of a packed auditorium in Davos, watching a room full of the world's most powerful technocrats lose their minds. These are people who usually express emotion through subtle nods and spreadsheet adjustments, but as Javier Milei finished his speech, they were on their feet, cheering like they'd just seen a miracle. One venture capitalist next to me was practically glowing. He kept pointing at his tablet, showing me the latest fiscal data out of Buenos Aires, a $10 billion surplus, inflation cratering to 2.8%. "Look at the number," he whispered, his voice thick with a kind of religious awe. "He's finally cured the disease. He's cut the dead weight and saved the patient." To him, those digital figures on the screen were the ultimate proof of a civilizational rebirth. Milei wasn't just a politician, he was a surgeon with a chainsaw, finally carving out the mediocrity of the state to reveal the hidden gold of the market. It felt like a triumph of pure, unadulterated freedom. But as the applause roared on, I noticed something odd. I asked the man if he'd seen the recent reports on Argentina's physical industrial output. The steel production, the per capita electricity consumption, the state of the national power grid. He waved me off without looking up from his trading app. "Who cares about the old world of smokestacks?" he said. "The ledger is balanced. That's all that matters." That instantaneous dismissal, the total focus on the financial layer, while completely ignoring the physical body of the nation, honestly left me stunned. It was a bizarre contradiction, celebrating the revival of a country while it was simultaneously selling off the very tools it needs to function as a modern power. It made me wonder, are we watching a resurrection, or are we just witnessing a very efficient autopsy? We're so enamored by the miracle of the numbers that we stopped asking what happens to a society when it wins the fiscal war but loses its ability to actually build anything. Behind the standing ovation in the Alps, there's a much colder reality emerging, one where the freedom to balance a checkbook might just be the freedom to watch a civilization fade into a very well-documented irrelevance.
That image it's just so powerful, isn't it? The cheering room in the Alps and the silence on a factory floor in Cordoba.
It felt like two different planets, and that disconnect, I think that's exactly what we're here to do today, to get into.
Exactly. The mission for this deep dive is to try and reconcile those two planets. Was that venture capitalist right? Is a balanced ledger the only thing that matters? Or was he, so focused on the spreadsheet that he was missing the entire country?
I think he was missing the entire physical world for the spreadsheet. But look, we've got a mountain of material to get through. We've got these Vision economic reports that are, frankly, they're glowing.
They're euphoric.
They are. And then right next to them, we have the industrial data from Industrial, which is, well, the opposite of euphoric.
Grim would be a good word.
Grim is the word. And we also have sociological reports from places like The Guardian and some really dense academic work comparing all of this to the East Asian miracle economies, Korea, Taiwan, China.
And that's the key. The mission today isn't just about whether Miley's inflation numbers are good or bad. It's about your question from the intro.
Resurrection or autopsy?
Resurrection or autopsy. Because, when you think about it, an autopsy report looks very neat and tidy. The patient's vital signs are incredibly stable.
Stable at 0.
Exactly. Heart rate, 0.
Yeah.
Temperature, room temperature. Everything is perfectly balanced. But the patient is, well, they're not exactly thriving.
That is a dark way to put it.
But that's the fundamental tension we're exploring. We're calling it this clash between the financial layer and the physical layer.
Right. Break that down for us.
So the financial layer is everything that venture capitalist was looking at on his tablet. It's the fiscal surplus. It's the inflation rate, bond yields, the currency exchange rate. It's the abstract world of numbers.
Yeah.
And that's Miley's home turf. He is, by all accounts, winning on that battlefield.
Undeniably. The numbers don't lie.
But then, underneath all of that, you have the physical layer. The actual stuff. We're talking about steel, concrete, electricity grids, bridges. We're talking about scientists, engineers, factories, the social bonds that hold a community together, the actual body of a civilization that exists in the real material world.
And the argument we're going to explore is that in order to save that financial layer, he might be, sacrificing the physical body of the nation.
That's the core question. Is he performing life-saving surgery or just a very neat embalming?
So to figure that out, we're going to dissect this body. We're going to start with the skeleton, which is the nation's infrastructure.
The bones.
Then we'll move to the brain, the industrial and technological capacity.
The ability to think and create.
And finally, we'll look at the soul, the social cohesion, the society itself.
And critically, we're not just looking at Argentina in a vacuum. We have to hold this experiment up against a control group, in a way. And that's East Asia. For the last 50, 60 years, if a country wanted to go from poor to rich, The blueprint was Korea. It was Taiwan.
Build a strong state, invest heavily, guide the economy.
Exactly. They built what's called state capacity. They treated the state as a gardener, nurturing growth. Milei's thesis is the polar opposite. He sees the state as a cancer. And his bet is that if you just burn the cancer out, healthy growth will just spontaneously emerge from the ashes.
It is the ultimate economic and civilizational gamble. So let's start with the bones. Let's start with the skeleton. Infrastructure.
Where the rubber meets the road. Or where it doesn't anymore.
Exactly. And I don't want to start with abstract budget lines about public works spending. I want to start with a person. I was reading this story about a man named Mateo, a veteran civil engineer down in Cordoba.
Okay.
This is a guy who has spent his entire life, 30 years, pouring concrete. He's built bridges, overpasses, highways. He's one of those invisible people who, make modern life possible.
The kind of person you only think about when a bridge collapses.
And he talks about his work with this real sense of purpose. He doesn't say, I pour concrete. He says, I stitch the country together. A bridge, for him, isn't just concrete and steel. It's a promise. It's a promise that a farmer can get their goods to a port, that a kid can get to a school.
It's the circulatory system. Yeah.
But right now, Mateo isn't stitching anything together. The account describes him standing on a half-finished overpass, a ramp that just climbs into the sky and then stops. It leads nowhere.
Because the funding was cut, part of the chainsaw.
The funding was frozen overnight, and he describes the silence. A construction site is supposed to be one of the loudest places on Earth, right? Jackhammers, engines, people yelling. He says his site is now dead silent, but the worst part for him is the rust. He points to the steel rebar sticking out of the concrete columns, the parts where the next section was supposed to connect, and it's already starting to turn orange. And he says this thing that it chilled me. He says, rust isn't just a color, it's a clock.
Ow. As an engineer, that must be horrifying. He's watching his own work decay in real time.
He is, and he explains that it's not like you can just come back in a couple of years when the money is there and pick up where you left off. Once that corrosion gets deep into the rebar, the structural integrity is compromised. You can't build on it. You have to tear the whole thing down and start from scratch.
So the cost isn't just delayed, it's multiplied.
Massively. And for him, this fiscal surplus that everyone in Davos is cheering for, he has this incredible analogy. He says it's like starving the body to save on the grocery bill.
That is devastatingly accurate.
Sure, your bank account looks a little healthier this month because you stopped buying food, but your body is literally consuming its own muscle tissue to stay alive. You're getting weaker, not stronger.
And that analogy is the perfect bridge from the physical layer back to the financial layer.
Yeah.
Because we have to be fair here. The argument for why you would stop buying groceries, so to speak, is very powerful.
Okay, so let's hear it. Let's look at the grocery bill.
Right. We have to dig into the data from Federico Sturzenegger, who's the Minister of Deregulation. He's the intellectual architect of the chainsaw model. And the numbers, I mean. You have to respect the audacity of them. They managed to cut real government expenditure by 30%.
30, not 3. 30.
30% in a single year.
Yeah.
To give you some context, if a government in Europe or North America proposed a 3% cut, it would be seen as a brutal, revolutionary act of austerity.
It would cause riots. It would be on the front page of every newspaper for a year.
Exactly. They did 10 times that. It is economic shock therapy in its most undiluted form. And the result, when you look at the ledger, is what that VC called a miracle. They achieved a fiscal surplus of 1.8% of GDP in 2024.
Which is the first one in how long?
14 years.
Oh.
For the first time in 14 years, the Argentine government took in more money than it spent. And that single act was like a fire extinguisher on inflation. It cratered from an annual rate of over 200% down to 2.8% on a monthly basis.
And we can't downplay how important that is. If you're an ordinary person living there, 200% inflation means your life savings are turning to dust in your hands. You can't plan, you can't save, it's chaos.
It's absolute chaos. It destroys the very possibility of a future. So stopping that bleeding is, without question, job number one. The logic from the Milei administration is that the patient was dying of a monetary fever and you had to break the fever at any cost.
And their diagnosis was that the public works projects, like Mateo's bridge, were part of the disease.
They viewed that kind of spending as a primary source of corruption and inefficiency. They called it the caste's ATM, a way for politicians to reward friends and steal money. The economic theory behind it is called crowding out.
Okay, what's that?
The idea is that when the government spends a lot of money, especially money it has to print, it sucks all the oxygen out of the economy. It causes inflation, it raises interest rates, and it makes it impossible for the private sector, the supposedly efficient part of the economy, to invest and grow.
So the government building a bridge crowds out a private company that might have wanted to build a factory.
That's the theory. So the logic is simple. Turn off the government spending spigot. Stop printing money. Cure the disease of money first. The private sector, freed from the dead weight of the state, will then flourish and build everything the country needs, but efficiently and without corruption.
So the argument is, we can't afford Mateo's bridge right now because we're broke. But once we've fixed the money, a private company will come along and build an even better bridge, if a bridge is actually needed.
That is the pure libertarian ideal in a nutshell. But, and this is a huge but,
yeah,
this is where we have to pivot back from the theory to the physical reality, because crowding out is a concept on a spreadsheet. Rust, as Mateo said, is a clock.
And the clock is ticking.
The clock is ticking. The data we have from Industrial, the global union federation, is just brutal. Construction activity across Argentina didn't just dip, it plummeted. A 27% drop in 2024.
27%. That's not a recession. That's a collapse. That's a full-on depression in that sector.
It's a cardiac arrest for the entire construction industry. And this is where the comparison to the East Asian miracle economies becomes so stark. Because if we look at the research we have here on stage-dependent infrastructure investment, well, they did the absolute 180-degree opposite of what Argentina is doing now.
So they didn't wait for the private sector to lead the way.
They didn't just not wait, they sprinted out ahead of it. The model in Korea, Taiwan, and later China was what economists call supply-leading investment.
Supply-leading. That sounds like jargon. Let's break that down.
Okay, let's use a concrete example. Picture South Korea in 1968. It's a poor country. I mean, poorer than many countries in Africa at the time. The dictator, Park Chung-hee, decides the country is going to build a massive, multi-lane, modern highway, the Gyeongbu Expressway, connecting the capital, Seoul, to the main port city of Busan.
And I'm guessing in 1968, there weren't a lot of Koreans with private cars stuck in traffic jams.
There were almost no cars. The critics, the World Bank, everyone screamed that it was a colossal waste of money. They called it a road to nowhere. They said, you're building a highway for foreigners on ox carts.
So why did they do it?
Because the government understood something fundamental. They weren't building the road for the economy that existed. They were building the road to create the economy they wanted.
Ah, so you build the highway first, which makes it cheaper and faster to move goods, and then the factories spring up along the route because the highway is there.
Exactly. The public infrastructure acts as a catalyst. It crowds in private investment. It's like building a trellis in a garden. You have to build the wooden frame before the vine starts to grow. The vine, which is the private sector, needs that structure to climb towards the sun. If you wait for the vine to grow tall before you build the trellis, the vine just spreads out on the ground and rots.
And Miley's argument is that the trellis is dead weight, and he's chopping it down to save money on wood.
He believes the vine will grow stronger and more freely without it. But the entire economic history of the last 70 years of development says otherwise. We have the data right here. In these miracle economies, the ratio of public infrastructure investment to private investment was consistently above 0.5. They were deliberately overinvesting in the skeleton.
Because they knew the muscles, the industry, needed a strong skeleton to attach to.
And the research is unambiguous. In the early stages of economic development, public infrastructure is the single most important determinant of private sector productivity. Every dollar the government spent on a road or a power plant unlocked several dollars of private investment and growth.
So when you cut that spending, you're not just saving money, you are actively lowering the future growth potential of every single business in the country.
You're putting a ceiling on your own future. So let's go back to Mateo, standing on his half-finished bridge. He's not just a guy who's lost his job. He is a prophet of economic decline. He is watching the country's future capacity physically dissolve into rust.
He's watching the circulatory system seize up. You can cure the monetary fever, you can bring inflation down to zero, but if the blood, the goods, the energy, the people can't move around the body because the arteries are clogged and broken, the patient is still going to die.
It's the autopsy metaphor again. The financial report at the time of death will look pristine. Cause of death: catastrophic organ failure due to systemic lack of circulation. But hey, the blood pressure was a perfect 120/80.
The financial layer was healthy, but the physical layer was necrotic.
And it leads us directly to the next layer of this autopsy, because it's not just about the bones, the infrastructure. It's about what that infrastructure is meant to support. It's about the brain.
Industry. technology, science, the capacity to not just move things, but to make things, to create things.
And this is where the damage might be even more severe and frankly harder to reverse. You can, in theory, rebuild a bridge in 10 years. It will cost you a lot more, but it's a physical task. But how do you rebuild a scientific community? How do you get back a generation of lost knowledge?
To make this real, I want to talk about Sophia. She's a software developer in her late 20s in Buenos Aires. A completely different generation from Mateo.
The new economy.
Exactly. But her story is linked to the old one. Her father worked his whole life in a factory, but it wasn't a car assembly plant. It was a high-tech facility that manufactured components for Argentina's domestic satellite program.
Right, I know about this. Argentina has a surprisingly advanced aerospace and nuclear sector. It's a point of national pride.
It was. They were doing genuinely sovereign, high-level engineering, but under Milei's chainsaw deregulation, they threw open the borders to imports and slashed state support for these industries. The factory couldn't compete with subsidized components being dumped from abroad. Last year, it shut down.
And that's a story we're seeing repeated in the data thousands of times over with small and medium enterprises.
But it's what Sophia's dad told her that really gets to the heart of this section. He told her that Argentina is undergoing a decerebralization.
Decerebralization, like a lobotomy.
Exactly. His words were, "We are trading our brain for muscles. We're shutting down the factory that makes satellite parts so we can focus all our energy on digging lithium out of a hole in the ground. We're choosing to be diggers, not thinkers."
That phrase, decerebralization, is a perfect, if brutal, summary of the data. The industrial report doesn't use that word, but it uses one just as strong. Industricide.
A killing of industry.
A deliberate killing. Manufacturing output shrank by 9.4% in 2024.
Okay.
Over 10,000 small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, have closed their doors.
And you have to think, each one of those is not just a building. It's a repository of knowledge. It's a team of people who knew how to do a specific complex thing. And when the factory closes, that knowledge just evaporates. It scatters to the wind.
It triggers a brain drain. But it's even more explicit in the scientific sector. This is just jaw-dropping. Public investment in research and development, R&D, has been cut so drastically that it's now just 0.208% of GDP.
0.2%. How does that compare to other countries?
It's microscopic. The OECD average is around 2.7%. South Korea and Israel are over 4.5%. Argentina is investing about 1/20th of what developed nations do in their future.
So major agencies are being hit hard.
They're being dismantled. CONICET, which is their equivalent of the National Science Foundation, or NASA, all rolled into one, is facing massive layoffs. 1,500 researchers have already lost their contracts. INTI, the Agricultural Technology Institute, is being forced to sell off its land. These are the institutions that create future wealth.
I also read about the threat to CONI, the space agency, and their nuclear sector. I mean, Argentina was one of the few developing nations that could design and export its own nuclear reactors. That's an elite, sovereign capability.
And those programs are now on ice. And again, let's be fair and bring in the financial layer argument. Sturzenegger and Milei would look at this and say, if that satellite component factory was so innovative, why did it need state protection to survive? If the private market valued it, it would have found a way to compete.
Market Darwinism, survival of the fittest. If you can't compete in the global marketplace without a subsidy, you deserve to go extinct.
That's the logic. In a perfect, frictionless, peaceful world, maybe that logic holds. But we don't live in that world. And this is where we have to bring in this analysis on defense in a multipolar world. This is the geopolitical angle that the crowd in Davos seems to have completely forgotten about.
They're operating on a 1990s end-of-history software package.
Exactly. They think the world is a global marketplace. But the world of the 2020s is a global battlefield. We have a major land war in Europe, chaos across the Middle East, and escalating tensions in the Pacific. And this analysis makes a stark argument. In this new era, computational power is national power. Your economic policy cannot be separated from your national survival.
So if you can't manufacture your own microchips or your own drones or even your own high-grade steel, you aren't really a sovereign nation anymore.
You're a dependency. You're a colony. You're a vassal state. Look at the key example they use, China. The report calls it an electrostate. A state whose power is fundamentally derived from its mastery over electrons, electricity consumption, computational power, and advanced manufacturing. China now consumes as much electricity as the United States, the European Union, India, and Russia combined.
That's an unbelievable statistic.
And they use that energy to control the entire global supply chain for what they call dual-use technologies, things that have both civilian and military applications: batteries, electric motors, drones, solar panels, advanced materials. The Chinese state directed the creation of that capacity. They knew that in a crisis, the nation that can make things will always dominate the nation that can only buy things.
And Argentina is consciously choosing to be a nation that only buys things. The model is, we don't need to make complex goods. We have lithium in the ground. We have the Vaca Muerta shale formation for oil and gas. We have beef and soy.
It's the extractivist model.
We'll sell the raw materials to the world, and we'll use that money to buy the finished iPhones and drones from whoever sells them cheapest.
It's the resource trap. It is a deliberate return to a colonial-era economic model. You sell the raw dirt, the unprocessed lithium ore, for maybe $10 a kilogram. You ship it to an industrial power like China. They use their massive energy and intellectual capacity to refine it, turn it into a high-performance battery, put it inside a car, and then they sell that car back to you for 100 times the price.
You are permanently on the losing end of the value chain.
You're selling rocks and buying robots.
Yeah.
And Sophia, the software developer, she sees this happening in real time. She's looking at her own country and asking, where do I fit into this future? If the entire economy is just mines and cattle ranches, there is no place for a software engineer or a satellite designer or a nuclear physicist.
So she becomes an export herself.
She becomes the brain drain personified. She'll take her skills to Spain or Germany or the United States. And once that human capital leaves, once the brain of the nation emigrates, it is incredibly, profoundly difficult to get it back. As we said, you can rebuild a road. It is almost impossible to rebuild an entire scientific community from scratch.
So the guy in Davos looks at the fiscal surplus from the lithium exports and cheers success. But a defense analyst looks at the closure of the satellite program and sees a catastrophic strategic defeat.
That's the disconnect in a nutshell. If a global conflict erupts and supply chains snap, Argentina is no longer a sovereign actor. It becomes a giant farm and minor logistics node for other, more powerful civilizations. It has lost the capacity for what the report calls collective survival.
It has traded long-term sovereignty for short-term financial efficiency.
Which may be the most dangerous trade a nation can make in the 21st century. Maybe you could get away with that in the relatively peaceful 1990s. But not today.
So we've seen the skeleton get brittle. We've watched the brain get lobotomized. That leaves us with the final and maybe most important layer of the autopsy, the soul.
The society itself. Because a nation isn't just a collection of assets on a balance sheet. It's a group of people trying, and hopefully agreeing, to live together. This is the hardest part to measure, but it might be where the deepest damage is being done.
And again, I want to start with a person. Her name is Elena, and she's a community center coordinator in Rosario.
Okay.
Her center used to be this buzzing hub of activity. It was funded by a mix of state and local money. It's where kids from the neighborhood would go for after-school programs, where elderly people could get a hot meal, where people could just connect. It was, in her words, the social glue of the community.
And I'm guessing the chainsaw found its way to her budget.
It cut everything. The funding is gone. The center is barely operating. But Elena describes something much more worrying than just a lack of money. She says the entire mindset of her neighborhood has changed.
So?
She calls it atomization. She says that people have stopped looking out for each other. The old ethos was, times are tough, we're all in this together, let's pool our resources. Now, with the government's constant rhetoric of radical individualism, she says her neighbors have started to see each other not as collaborators, but as competitors.
Every man for himself.
It's the purest form of individualism. I have to survive, and if you fall behind, that's your problem, not mine. The social fabric is fraying.
And we have to be extremely clear about this. This isn't an unintended side effect of the policy. This is the central philosophical goal of the entire project.
Right. Milei is a self-described anarcho-capitalist. He famously said, there is no such thing as market failure, and that the state is the ultimate evil. The individual is the only moral unit that matters.
And Sturzenegger's reforms are explicitly designed to shatter what they call non-inclusive institutions. In their language, that's a code word for unions, for community organizations, for political movements, for any collective group that stands between the individual and the pure market. They call these groups the caste.
And they see them as parasites.
Exactly. Parasites that extract wealth from productive individuals. So the goal is to destroy those collective structures and liberate the individual to compete on their own.
But what Elena is saying on the ground is that when you destroy that social glue, You don't magically get a nation of hyper-competitive super entrepreneurs. You get a nation of lonely, scared, and desperate people fighting each other for scraps.
And the numbers, the hard data, absolutely support her observation. We saw poverty peak at nearly 53% during the worst of the shock therapy.
More than half the country.
More than half the country fell below the poverty line. It's since dropped to around 31.6%, which is an improvement, but still, that's almost 1 in 3 people. We're seeing weekly protests by pensioners whose life savings have been incinerated by the initial devaluation. We're seeing reports of a sharp rise in homelessness, with people literally living in dumpsters in Buenos Aires.
And the government's justification for this pain is this idea I saw Miley bring up, this economic concept of being Pareto optimal. It sounds very scientific and clean.
Slight chuckle. Oh, it's a classic bit of economist jargon. In a textbook, a Pareto optimal or Pareto efficient change is one that makes at least one person better off without making a single person worse off.
Which sounds nice, but completely impossible in the real world.
It is functionally impossible. You cannot cut a national budget by 30% without making millions of people worse off.
Yeah.
You can't shut down a factory or stop a bridge project without hurting someone. So when they use a term like that, it's not a real analysis. It's a rhetorical shield to hide the reality, which is a massive, brutal transfer of wealth and pain. They are asking the poorest and the middle class to endure immense suffering now for a theoretical, abstract prosperity at some point in the future.
The Guardian called it social fatigue. There's a limit to how much pain a society can endure before it just breaks.
And this is the final and maybe most important contrast with the East Asian model. Because the miracle economies weren't just about building highways and factories. They were about building a national consensus. They were about building a society.
The concept of the developmental army.
Exactly. In South Korea under Park, or in Taiwan, or even if you look at more recent examples like Ethiopia's developmental push, the state framed national development as a war. It was a national war against poverty and weakness. And in a war, you need an army. You need social cohesion. You need everyone pulling in the same direction.
It was a message of shared sacrifice. We will all tighten our belts today so that our children can build world-class ships and semiconductors tomorrow.
The state wasn't the enemy to be destroyed. The state was a commanding general. It provided the mission, the strategy, and society was mobilized to achieve that mission. There's a powerful sense of collective destiny, of national purpose.
Whereas Miley's message is the exact opposite. It's, there is no collective destiny. There is only your destiny. Go out there and compete. Good luck.
And the critique from that developmental state perspective is that you cannot build a resilient, powerful nation on a foundation of pure individualism. You need what sociologists call granularity, those thick bonds of trust and reciprocity in families and communities and workplaces. The very things Elena is watching disappear.
Because when a real crisis hits, a pandemic, a global financial crash, a war, the atomized individual is incredibly fragile. The cohesive community is resilient.
It's your line from the intro that sticks with me. When every man is an island, the archipelago cannot stand against the storm.
And Miley is dynamiting the bridges between the islands because he thinks the maintenance costs are a drag on the budget.
It's the perfect summary. So let's pull the camera all the way back. We've conducted the autopsy. We've examined the skeleton, the brain, and the soul.
And we're back to the original question. Is the patient alive? Is this a resurrection or not?
Well, the financial layer, the spreadsheet in Davos shouts, yes. The bleeding is stopped. The fiscal fever has broken. The surplus is real. The venture capitalist is ecstatic.
But the physical layer is in critical condition. The skeleton is rusting. The brain is shrinking. The soul is fracturing.
The term that keeps coming up in these analyses is hemostasis.
Hemostasis.
It's a medical term. It means you've stopped the flow of blood. And Javier Milei has, without a doubt, achieved hemostasis. He applied a tourniquet to the hemorrhaging Argentine economy and stopped the hyperinflation. That is a real significant victory. We can't and shouldn't deny that.
But a tourniquet is an emergency measure. It's not a cure. If you leave a tourniquet on for too long,
you lose the limb. The tissue dies from lack of circulation, and that is the profound risk here. He has stopped the bleeding, but he's not yet begun the transfusion.
Yeah.
He isn't building the new blood cells. He isn't fostering the industries, the infrastructure, or the social cohesion that generate real, sustainable, long-term national wealth and power.
It brings us back to that idea of the body of modernity. True civilizational power in the 21st century isn't a positive number on a spreadsheet.
No. Real power is the hum of a semiconductor foundry working through the night. It's the quiet glide of a high-speed rail line connecting your cities. It's the controlled fury inside a nuclear fusion reactor being perfected at a national lab. It is the ability to build and master complex physical systems.
There's that final quote from the Dusk in Davos text. History's verdict will be written not in speeches, but in steel, silicon, and the sustained will to master them.
And the final line, only the builders shall inherit the earth. That's the thought that keeps echoing. You can be the most brilliant accountant in history. You can balance every ledger down to the last cent. But if you don't actually build anything, then at the end of the day, you don't really own anything. You're just managing the decline.
It's a haunting thought. We might be sitting here celebrating that the house is finally no longer on fire, while completely ignoring the fact that, to put it out, we sold off all the furniture, ripped the copper wiring out of the walls, and broke the family apart.
And in a dangerous multipolar world, an empty, cold, and divided house is a very vulnerable place to live.
This is an experiment we're going to be watching very, very closely. It's not often you get to see a nation so cleanly gamble its entire civilizational model on a single economic theory.
It truly is the defining economic experiment of our time. And the results, one way or the other, are going to teach us a tremendous amount about what actually makes a nation strong and what makes it fade away.
Thank you so much for breaking all of this down. It's heavy, but incredibly important stuff.
My pleasure. It's a critical story. Until next time.